Hi boys and girls, we're going to get started on our first ever virtual math lesson today. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that you have all of the materials that you're going to need. During this time, it would be great for you to have access to your digital geoboards that we practiced working with yesterday. You also need square pieces of paper, maybe 2 or 3 of them. You can cut out squares at home, or if you have Post-it notes available, they make a perfect square for you to use for this task. You might also need scissors, colored pencils or crayons, and your Geoboard recording paper, which I have attached in this lesson. So we're going to get ready to get started. Make sure that you have all of those materials. So today we're going to talk more about partitioning squares into equal halves. So when we are partitioning, think about what that word means for a moment. We've talked a little bit about this at school. What does it mean to partition? So when you partition something, it means that you separate it, right? You cut it up into a different shape or maybe into a smaller piece. So today we're going to talk more about partitioning, and we're going to use those tools that I mentioned to help us. All right, so what I would like for you to do right now is get out your paper squares, and I'm going to use Post-it notes. I'm going to take 3 Post-it notes out. So what I would like for you to do with your paper squares is I want you to try to create equal shares. And an equal share means that the 2 pieces that you split it up into are the same size. They are equal to each other. They look the same, and they take up the same amount of space. So think about different ways that you could fold up your square piece of paper to create equal shares. Go ahead and try that out. Now, there are many different ways that you could have chosen to create these equal shares. Some of you might have folded, some of you might have measured, some of you might have used another method. If you have a different method that you use that you want to share, make sure you comment on our assignment. So, one way that you could have done this would be to fold. When I was working on this task, folding it came to me as the way that I would like to do it. That would keep it the simplest and make the most sense to me. So I tried a few different ways of folding, and then I just drew on the line so that you could see where my folds are. Now my partitions aren't perfect, but I did try my best to make sure that they look mostly even. So when you talk about the way that you partition your shapes, some sentence frames that you might use include, I divided my square into 2 equal shares by, or I know that the shares are equal because. So let me give you an example. If I look down here at this square that I divided right here, I divided my square into 2 equal shares by splitting it down the middle diagonally. I could also say, I know that the shares are equal because the 2 shares are the same size, right? In all 3 of these, they're just about the same. So if you have equal shares, you have to remember that that means that they are split into 2 parts that are the same size. All right, boys and girls, so you should have your Geoboard paper in front of you and access to our electronic geoboards that I shared with you yesterday. So you are going to take this square geoboard. We're working on just the square geoboard right now. You are going to use the entire geoboard to make yourself sorry about that, to make yourselves one big square. So it's going to look something like this. And your color choice is completely up to you. One big square. So once you have created one big square, then you're going to go in and you are going to try to make as many different versions of equal halves as you can for this square. Once you have created one or two, you can choose which one you like best. And I would like for you to record it on your sheet. So once you create it on your screen, you're going to record it on your sheet. After you've recorded one on your sheet, see how many different ones you can make. And for that, you can use this sheet. It's okay if you don't fill up every box, but I would like for you to try out recording different sizes and shapes. So if I have a square that looks like my screen here, and I'm going to partition it into two equal pieces, I might take another rubber band and go like this. Whoops, sorry, that was a mistake. I might take one and go like this. So now I've partitioned my, my square into two equal parts that are made up of another shape. Think about what that other shape might be for a moment. What other shape am I showing you here? If you're thinking of a rectangle, you were thinking correctly, right? There are two rectangles making up this square. So now I'm going to record what this looks like on my sheet, and then I'm going to show it to you. Give me just one moment. Take a look at this. Do you see how my picture on my paper matches what I created on my board? That's what you're going to do first. Once you've created one, draw it on your big paper. You can use marker to match your colors like I did if you want. The next thing that you're going to do is get out all of your little mini square geoboards and try out some other ways of splitting up this square to make equal partitions. Equal partitions. So you're going to take these squares and you're going to equally partition them to make new shapes and to show equal parts. All right, second graders, so there's a few things that I want to make sure that we emphasize when we're learning about partitioning. And remember that partitioning is when you split something up into pieces. And when you split a shape up into equal parts, that means that both pieces are the same size. So some of the important things that I want you to remember about this lesson are that there are more than one way that you can partition a square to make halves or equal pieces, and that two halves make one whole. Also, equal shares of identical wholes need not have the same shape. So, equal shares of identical wholes don't have to be the same shape as the original shape. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. One example of how to equally partition a square might look like this. When we look at this Geoboard sketch, you could see that this square is split into two pieces. It's split into two pieces, and these pieces are equal. There's a few ways that we can tell that these pieces are equal. One way that you could see that they're equal is because they would fit right on top of each other if I folded them in half. Another way that we can tell that they're equal is by counting up the number of dots in each of these shapes. That third thing that I want you to remember about how they don't have to be made of the same shape is shown here. You can see here that even though this is a square, it's not split up into two squares, right? It's split up into two of what shape? It's split up into two triangles. Let's look at another example. These two shapes, these are both squares. These squares are split up into equal parts as well. They are partitioned into two equal sides. Again, you can split these in half and fold it over and get the exact same shape. You could also count up the dots on each side. Each of these two shapes is made up of two rectangles. It's not made up of two exactly the same squares, it's made up of two rectangles. Although squares are a type of rectangle, it is still a different shape than what you see in the red compared to what I partitioned using the blue. I want to show you now a couple of examples that would not demonstrate equal parts or equal halves. So here I have two ways that I could have chosen to partition my square. But there's some problems with these two examples. In this one, you can see that I couldn't fold this anyway and get equal halves, right? There's no way for me to fold up this paper so that where my line is makes an equal mark. Also, you can see that this is made up of way fewer dots than the rest of this shape. Similarly, you can see that here, right? Even though this cuts straight through the whole shape, it's not cutting straight through the middle of the shape, right? So we can see here that this also does not demonstrate equal parts. When we are trying to show an equally partitioned shape, we should be able to fold those pieces on top of each other and have them be the same size. They should also be made up of the same number of dots. So remember, if I took this and I folded it in half, these two halves don't make a whole, right? If I had this piece twice, it wouldn't make a whole. If I had this piece twice, it would be bigger than the whole. So it's important to remember that when you partition a shape into equal parts, it means that the two parts add up to a whole. All right, so now that we've had some review of what it looks like to partition a square equally and unequally, we're going to do one more of these shapes together. So how this is going to look would be, first you're going to start with drawing your square. I've already drawn my square here with green marker. So first draw your square or show it to me using your Geoboard online. Go ahead and make your square. At any time, if you need to pause the video to give yourself more time, please feel free to do so. All right, so once you have made your square that looks like mine, either on your Geoboard online or on your paper, I want you to draw a line that looks like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to start up here at this top corner. You're going to count that as 1. You're going to count this second dot as 2. And you're going to start drawing your line. So your line is going to start at that second dot right here. It's going to go through this very center dot. And it's going to end over here on this side of the square, excuse me. So it's going to start at the second dot. It's going to end 1, 2, 3, 4 at the 4th dot. So you're going to draw a line that looks just like this. Just like this. Okay, make sure that you draw a line that looks just like that. I'm going to go over it with red to make it a little bit more visible. Just like that. Make sure that you get that line drawn down. So, now that you have this shape on your Geoboard, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Oh, no I'm not, I guess. Okay, once you have this shape on your Geoboard, I want you to think about how they might match up. How might they match up? Are these two pieces equal or are they unequal? And one way that we might want to check is by cutting them out. Because this looks a little bit different than this example from earlier, right? It's close, but it's not exactly the same. You can see that this shape is not a triangle, right? It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. While this shape down here is a true triangle with only 3 sides. So what I would like for you to do now is to cut out these shapes. Cut these out into 2 shapes and let's see if they're equal. Go ahead and start cutting. All right, so I've cut up my paper Geoboard like this. Now I have 2 pieces. So like I was mentioning earlier, 2 parts that are equal should make a whole. They should also be able to stack right on top of each other. Do you see how these 2 pieces can do just that? I can have it like this to make this, I can have it like this to represent the shape, but I can also fold it in half and stack these 2 pieces on top of each other. These two pieces are equal. They're the same size, and when you put them together, they make a whole. So even though they look a little bit unique compared to, say, this triangle or these two rectangles, they do still represent two equal parts that create a whole.
All right, we're about to wrap up our first math lesson as a virtual class. But before we do, there's just a couple of things that I want to emphasize. First, there's more than one way to partition a square to make halves. You could partition a square in a way that looks like this, or, that looks like this. There are multiple different ways that you could show that. Another important thing that I want you to remember is that two halves make a whole, right? So if I was to cut these triangles right in half, I put them together and they make a whole. The last thing that I want you to remember from today is that equal shares of identical shapes do not have to be made up of that same shape. So like we talked about earlier, these two triangles are triangles. They're not squares, but these two triangles put together are able to represent and make a square. So those are the things that I want you to remember from today. All right, so now that we've completed our lesson, I would like for you to make sure that you're able to submit some of your work. One option for submitting proof of completion would be to take a screenshot or a screen grab of your online Geoboard showing some of the different ways you partitioned your square. Another choice could be taking a photo of your sheet with the small square geoboards to show me that you completed this task. You could also show me how you partitioned your square and how you partitioned your big square. So for this lesson, you can choose which one of those things you would like to submit as your work to show that you can mark this task as completed. In the future, I'll be sure to let you know what the expectation is for what you submit on Google Classroom. If you need help with uploading or screen grabbing, there are many online resources you can use. You may also reach out to your teacher or me. Thanks. Have a good day.